welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and your faithful host, Josh Bertram, is, I don't know where he is, actually. But this week, we are joined by one of the smartest minds in the legal world that I know, Corinna Lain, who I think this is probably your fourth or fifth appearance. So,
several times. You must not know many other lawyers then. You think I'm it.
Well, I mean, I do, but I still maintain that you're one of the brightest minds and most charismatic and personable and nice. And I mean, I can go on, but you know, this isn't so much about you as it is about the issue that we're talking about today, and that is Santa Claus. So we don't do too many Christmas episodes of the podcast, but we thought we'd make an exception given, you know, sort of the light that's being shined on all these different special subcommittees in Congress and all the different, you know, top secret files being found at Mar-a-Lago and everything. So we thought we would focus on probably one of the biggest and most famous criminals in modern history, and that is Kris Kringle, or AKA St. Nicholas, or AKA Santa Claus. We all know he's the head of a global crime syndicate. But what we may not know is the depths and the extent of his crime. So we're hoping that Corinna can help us unpack, you know, some of the potential crimes that may have been committed by this red-suited grandma trampling fugitive. We're really excited to have her on. So hey, thanks for being here again, Corinna.
I have to say, of all the podcasts, and we've had some serious subjects. This one is just a lot of fun. So I'm very happy to be here and spend this time with you, poking around, thinking about what crimes Santa has committed or will commit. And I have to say, as a former prosecutor, I feel like this proviso is very important. As a former prosecutor, I personally would use my prosecutorial discretion to let Santa skate on all of these potential crimes, because I do not want to end up on the naughty list. And it's kind of marginal already. So, you know.
Yeah. So,
sure.
I mean, we have a lot to cover, and we got some really great questions from folks from our associated Facebook group page. But maybe we kind of start kind of from the beginning. So we know that Santa Claus lives in the North Pole, allegedly. He has to travel all around the globe, you know, doing his crimes. You know, maybe just for the purpose of, you know, your expertise, we'll keep all of the crimes within sort of the borders of the United States. But is Santa flying from the North Pole to the United States a crime?
I mean, pretty much, probably, you know. So one of the things about the criminal law is you have to have criminal intent. And so that might knock out a lot of what we have to say. Although, you know, some of the intent is just, I mean, some criminal laws don't have intent, mens rea requirements. And other ones are like, you know, if you did it purposefully, well, then it's satisfied. So again, another proviso. But yeah, let's think about that. I mean, you'd start with the transportation offenses, and it's like, does Santa have a license? Like, does he have a license to fly? Because if he doesn't have a license to fly, then he's in violation of a bunch of federal aviation, you know, FAA regulations. He has to have a pilot certificate to fly the airwave. And I think it's a federal crime punishable by 3 years if you're flying anything in the air without a proper license that holds people. So, you know, that's just Santa. And then there's the sleigh.
Yeah.
Like, is the sleigh airworthy? I mean, I think it is. It seems to have been working for a long time. but Santa would be subject to other FAA laws if the vessel he was flying was not properly licensed, which I bet it isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, and also, even if he is licensed, he has to register himself on a pilot list. He has to register his aircraft. He has to post a copy of the registration and the airworthiness certificate, where other people can find it. It has to be displayed in the cabin or cockpit entrance. There's regulations for any aircraft's baggage. It has to be secure. It has to be in a baggage compartment, which, like, is that the back of a sleigh?
But it's kind of like open. It's like open. So
It's kind of open. I don't know. I'm thinking the FAA might have a problem with this, actually.
Yeah. Now, I do have sort of a follow-up question. So the like NORAD tracks Santa. So would that imply that he's got some sort of ability to be tracked or something like that? And would that help his case?
I don't think it would help his case. I think it would hurt his case, right? Because they're like, there he is. He's out in the airwaves. But, the fact that they're tracking Santa makes me think of another offense, and that's speeding. Like, the area of the Earth, 196.9 million square miles. Santa travels around the globe in one night, which I think that means he's going approximately 8.2 million miles per hour. Surely that's got to violate some law.
Yeah, I mean, is there, like, because I know, so if I fly from Virginia to Seattle on a whatever plane, the plane goes, I don't know, like 400 or 500 miles an hour. Like are there speed limits?
I mean, surely there are, right? Like, surely going 1,000,000 miles an hour is over some FAA reg. And the other thing about tracking that makes me think of is Santa is violating, aside from like the whole licensing thing and speeding, Santa is violating all kinds of FAA rules. So federal law requires that aircraft not travel below 400 feet of the earth, of the ground, except for landing, or obviously taking off. So I'm like, Santa going rooftop to rooftop. I think that's a serious problem. He's definitely going below the 400 feet.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. It wouldn't make sense for him to like go on a roof and then go up. And then
he's
come
got to
back down.
land. So he's violating that repeatedly. And then there's restricted airspace, places over DC, military installations, nuclear power plants. All of those are restricted public use. I think you can get certain, exemptions, but the public can't just fly over those areas. It's restricted. But Santa just does what he wants.
Yeah. How much of the airspace above our house do we own?
That is a really good question. Actually, it's really interesting because some students and I were talking about that this semester in criminal procedure. Because this is another thing. If we say that Santa has some sort of government action, that the Constitution applies to Santa, which I agree is a debatable proposition. But if that's true, then trespassing onto property, just going onto property, whether or not it's trespass, we haven't even gotten to the property law offenses, but actually going onto the property with the intent to gain information would be a search. So, how far up does airspace go that it's still your property? I don't know. But for sure, Santa is going below the 400 foot. He has to.
Yeah,
so tracking him, I think, is pretty incriminating. Don't you think?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm kind of keeping a sort of running toll of years in prison as you're mentioning them, because I want to get a sense of how, should Santa actually be convicted and have to serve time in The Hague or what have you. I just want to know how many years we're not going to have Christmas. So
I think the kids would bust him out.
they probably would.
That's what I think.
They probably
they
would.
wouldn't have any of it.
So, kind of switching gears here a little bit. Okay, so he flies from North Pole. He gets to her house, and now he has to get inside of her house. You know, the rumor is, you know, traditionally he goes down a chimney, but not all houses have chimneys. So like, you know, there's probably, I don't know, it goes through the garage or through the front door, or somehow or another he enters into our home. So what are some of the criminal implications of that?
Yeah. So there's plenty of crimes, and you know, before we get there, can I just mention two others?
Yeah.
There's potential animal welfare. This is still in the transportation area. Like we have to really think about those reindeer, right? The Animal Welfare Act requires that animals not be deprived of adequate food, water, shelter, rest, care, and they have to be protected from excessive heat or cold. So I don't know exactly what Santa does, but Santa's moving really fast, and nobody's talking about Santa giving his reindeer a break, and they're carrying all of that weight. So I think there's a potential problem there. And then also, by the way, before we leave, you know, before Santa packs everything up, I think Santa's probably in violation of some child welfare laws, right? Like, who are those elves? Are they kids? If they're kids, how old are they? How long do they work? Is Santa's shop a sweatshop?
Yeah.
You know, like,
True. I mean, and also, like, is there, like, are there any sort of equal opportunity, you know, violations? Because, I mean, one, they're all elves. So, like, where's the diversity? I believe, I mean, I haven't seen too many female elves either. And all of them are white.
That's a good point. I know. Yeah, you're right. There could be some kind of something there. And we know that it's, you know, not necessarily an inclusive shop because, you know, Rudolph. And I think there was Rudolph was not accepted. Rudolph was different, and Rudolph was an outcast. That's the story. But wasn't there also an elf that was, you know, outcast, and he was sent to the island of misfit toys? Yeah.
I mean, and it's hard to really sort of like brush off like Buddy the elf, who was sent to New York to find his real father.
Right. So, I mean, I think you're right. We need to talk about what actually happens at the house, because that's its own slew of, you know, potential incrimination and danger for Santa. But, you know, just before he even leaves and just getting around. Oh, by the way, what about customs? Like, you know, unless, like, Santa's coming from the North Pole. I assume that's somewhere in Canada. I don't know where that is. But, you know, he's coming into the United States. He's going everywhere. Is he filling out customs forms? Is he declaring? Is he paying duty on that stuff? I don't think so. Yeah.
So breaking and entering, what do you got there?
Okay. So when you get to the home, there's several things. So the first one I think of is trespass. Right? Just trespass is going on to your property without permission. Well, does Santa have permission? Like, and what does it mean for Santa to have permission? Like, and does Santa ask permission? Like in my house, Santa kind of has permission. We leave a plate of cookies and milk, and generally a couple carrots too for the reindeer.
Really?
You know,
Carrots?
he's not taking care of them. But what about, you know, so like maybe there's an implied invitation there and it wouldn't be trespass. I don't know. What do you do in your home?
Yeah, so we normally crank the fire up really high in our fireplace because we are very Santa averse in our home. And, you know, generally we, you know, make sure all of our security cameras are on and, we've got rounds and and the weapons. Because funny story, actually, like my youngest 6-year-old recently came to us and was like, okay, is Santa real? Just be honest with me. Like I just know. And then we told him. So spoiler alert, if you got kids in the room, like we told him like Santa wasn't real. And
wait, what?
That's
what?
Oh,
no, stop. No, Will, you're laughing. Santa's totally real. Santa, the spirit of Christmas, is totally real.
Yeah,
is there.
My wife and I, Stan, was like, Daddy works way too hard to have like this like white dude come in and like take the credit. So like, no, like we're just gonna play to them straight. So maybe, he may be real, but like he'll never make his way into our house is all I'm saying.
Okay. Well, certainly not with the fire going. Well, your house is a perfect example of this, that, for your house, you're like, I'm not inviting you in. And so that would definitely, the first thing that's happening is trespass. And the rule is that members of the public can use the means of ingress and egress. So if you have, what does it take to get to your front door, right? Like the front sidewalk that goes up to your door. Members of the public can do that. Justice Scalia famously said, that, the police can do anything a Girl Scout can do. So I always think, of a Girl Scout, could a Girl Scout come up to your home? You might not buy cookies from the said Girl Scout, but yes, right? You could go up, you could knock on the door. So that much is not trespassing unless you have signs up that say no trespassing, which I think people do, right? Like some people do. But even aside from that, Santa is not just going up to your front door and using the front walk. Think about this. Santa is landing on the roof of your home with all of that weight and all of those reindeer. That's got to damage some shingles. That's a separate thing. It's potential property damage that happens. But just, going somewhere on your private property that, you don't have permission and there's not a general, generally accepted permission, that would be trespassing. And then there's more. So another one that, by the way, before we get to trespassing, there's also trespassing of animals. So you are also responsible for any damage that occurs if you take an animal on someone else's property. And I'm thinking those reindeer might cause some damage, possibly. So there's regular trespass, there's trespass of animals.
Is this like if they go to the bathroom or something like on your roof?
Don't you think they have to?
I'd imagine so.
They have to. By the way, I think I forgot this one. But yeah, the Reindeer Act of 1937 prohibits non-native Indians from owning a herd of reindeer in Alaska. Kris Kringle is not, right? Santa is not. Santa's got red hair like I do or have. Yeah. But so I'm like, Santa's even having the herd of reindeer is not allowed, at least in Alaska.
But is he? Is he? I'm trying to think. Okay, Santa presumably predates indigenous people. So could an argument be made that he's native?
Yeah, I think you could. I think you could make that argument. But, what is native? Because he might have predated the act, and maybe he'd be grandfathered in. That's a really good question. But I think the native, American, Alaskan Indians were probably there before him, right?
Yeah.
He came over, he's got red hair and, blue eyes and light skin.
It's true.
I don't know. Well, I guess now he's got white hair, but whatever. Okay, so back to your property offenses. So we've talked about trespass. The other one I think of is unlawful entry. So there's unlawful entry and there's breaking and entering. And breaking and entering is in some sense an obvious one. You're like, oh, he totally breaks the plane of the home by opening a door, opening a window, coming down the chimney, and he's entering, right? The only thing about that, and that's a felony, the only thing about that is that breaking and entering actually is a specific intent crime. So it's not just breaking and entering, it's breaking and entering with the intent to commit a felony inside. So what is the felony that he commits inside? Most of the time, it's going to be larceny, coming in and stealing stuff, right? That's burglary. I've had a case where it was coming inside to destroy. This was an ex-girlfriend, but whatever. But coming inside to destroy property. And that counted as not only the destruction of property, but also the breaking and entering. So, I'm not sure what the intent of Santa is to commit which, crime once inside. I don't think it's larceny, right? Like, I don't think he's taking anything. If anything, he's leaving things.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, if I found somebody's wallet on the street, and I, looked at their driver's license, got their address, went to their house, kicked down their door and said, "Here's your wallet." like would I be charged with anything? Or would the owner of that house have to, I don't know, like file a lawsuit against me or something?
No, you could. Well, first of all, you'd probably get shot. Because this is America.
It's America.
But aside from that, no, I mean, you wouldn't be charged with breaking and entering. You would be charged with unlawful entry and destruction of property. So unlawful entry, which I think I mentioned a couple minutes ago, right? Like there's unlawful entry and there's breaking and entering. Breaking and entering, which seems like the most obvious fit, is actually a little harder. But unlawful entry, that totally fits. It fits in your home like a glove. Like trespassing, you just go on your roof and you've trespassed. You go into your yard, your backyard, you've trespassed. But unlawful entry is going into someone's home without permission. And so I think there's definitely an unlawful entry charge that could be made there. I just don't think that Santa is being all that careful in seeing where he has permission and where he does not. And then, of course, there's destruction of property. There's that. There's another one that I was thinking of, too, which is intrusion. So in certain states, it's they call it intrusion, and I think they call it invasion of privacy in other places, but they're basically the same thing. And the idea is, peeping, snooping, prying into private places, getting information. Like you can't just go up and, press your hand, head against someone's window and be like looking in. And like, you can't do that. That's like an invasion of privacy. So you've definitely got that. I mean, people do private things in their homes. What if Santa walked in on someone doing something, like that would embarrass Santa and would embarrass the owners or occupants of that home. So I think you've got peeping or intrusion, invasion of privacy.
Who has the burden of proof to unlawful entry, like if I invite somebody in my house, but then later don't want them in my house and kick them out, and they don't want to leave. Like I feel like that's different than me just not inviting somebody at all and they come into my house.
Yeah, it totally is. But I had a number of cases, actually. They were domestic violence cases. And I can think of one in particular. She's on the phone with 911. And she tells the guy, her boyfriend, she's like, get out. And he's, swearing at her and doing these things. And she's like, I want the police to come here to get him to leave. He won't leave. I'm telling him to leave. Mm-hmm. And we were able to prosecute that case just on the 911 call because he had been invited in, but there was an altercation and she said, get out, and he wouldn't leave. And he was charged and convicted, I believe. Yeah. With unlawful entry. So, unlawful entry is that sort of lighter, form of a breaking and entering or an unlawful entry. And the courts will take that into consideration. Like, well, I was invited in. I just didn't leave when I was supposed to. It's the same crime, but they'll take that into consideration in sentencing.
Yeah, and if Santa gets hurt, so, like in my case, I've got like a roaring fire in my fireplace. He comes down the chimney, he gets like 3rd-degree burns, what have you.
That's on him, man.
is it so like that there's no like culpability on my end to have to worry about his safety?
Reckless nuisance, like maintaining a nuisance, could you be so that's more of a tort. I think you're fine. I think so there might be like some reckless endangerment stuff, but that would be what Santa does. That wouldn't be anything that you do in your home. But so I think he's okay there. The other one I thought about was threats. So you've got the intrusion, and I was thinking he sees you when you're naughty. He sees you when you're nice. He knows if you've been bad or good. Like, that's totally intrusion, because most of us have been naughty, right? Yeah. Can we just agree on that? Mm-hmm. So if he's seeing everything, then... I think you've got that. But then he says, you better not cry, you better not pout. Like, that's a potential threat. What's he going to do? Like, he's going to withhold, the best, day of the year goodies from kids. I think that's a potential threat of harm to one's property.
How about like
property to be hoped
like
for
harassment? Like if he puts coal in your stocking.
Oh yeah. Oh, you could get into defamation. Now we're not talking now about the criminal law, but right, like if I got coal, I'd be like, no, that is wrong. Even though inside I'd be like, yeah, well, it was really the best year. So there's that, and then I was thinking this goes back to, whether or not Santa would count as a state actor and the Constitution would apply, which again, I admit, I concede that's a little bit iffy. But, Santa's asking these kids, the kids are sitting on his lap. Santa is asking these kids, have you been good? I think that implicates the Fifth Amendment, privilege against compelled self-incrimination. Right? Like, what are you going to do? Like, think about it, right? You're there, and what are you going to do? These are your choices. A, you lie to Santa. Mm-hmm. That's bad, right? Santa's going to know. B, you say, yes, I've been bad. Or C, you say, I'm just going to be quiet about this and not answer Santa's question, in which case Santa's going to know. So that's not actually all that unlike the cruel trilemma that is the historical, antecedent and reason for the Fifth Amendment privilege against compelled self-incrimination. The whole point is your choices are really, really bad, right? When you get called to the witness stand, this is like getting called to the witness stand, only it's Santa and not a courtroom. So I think there's serious issues there. Could you
invoke your Fifth Amendment, but also tell Santa what you want for Christmas?
Could you have a limited invocation? Mm-hmm. you could say, I refuse to answer that question on the grounds that it may incriminate me. And yeah, then you could say, but also I would like X, Y, Z, because that doesn't incriminate you, and doesn't go to the deeds that are the topic of your invocation. I don't know how well that's going to work out for you, though. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Now,
you could even have a retaliatory claim on something like that, right? If you didn't, I guess that would go into the coercion of, the privilege against compelled self-incrimination. But I think there's a lot of that going on around Christmas time. People should beware.
Yeah. And
careful.
And, kind of in that same vein, because I hadn't really thought about the Santa element of having kids, take pictures and, incriminating themselves or not incriminating themselves. But if you ask for, a Red Ryder BB gun and Santa gives you
your eye out.
Yeah. And Santa gives you a water gun, is there any sort of law under the Commerce Clause, that I asked for this with the expectation of getting this, but I got something different.
Now we're getting into product liability and contract breaches and stuff like that. That's pretty far out of my wheelhouse. But, it depends on what the reasonable expectation is. And was there an implicit contract, right? Was there a meeting of the minds that if I'm good, I'll get what I want for Christmas? And then if I were good, which again, right, that's iffy. But if I were good and didn't get what I want for Christmas, perhaps you might have some claim for, a breach of implied contract if everybody knows. Think of a kid, right? They're looking at mom and dad saying, all right, here's the deal. This is going to be a stretch for me, but I'm going to be really good, at least in December. Right? Yeah. But in exchange, I want X. And then you don't get it. I think they're going to feel like they've been duped. I feel like they would feel like there had been an implicit contract.
Yeah.
Yeah. That gets into, intellectual property laws too. I hadn't really thought about that, but Santa's making his own stuff, but he's branding it.
Yeah.
Right? There's some brands going on. And if that stuff's not coming from Patagonia or from
Apple
wherever, then you've got some serious intellectual property violations, which again is not getting you into criminal violations, which is my wheelhouse. But I think there's still some pretty hefty costs to that. You could get sued.
Yeah. Are the crimes that Santa commit, do they fall under the RICO Act or anything like that?
RICO. So you're talking about racketeering. Oh, that's a really good one, Will. I hadn't thought about that. So does Santa's actions constitute a criminal enterprise? So you would need two acts, which you've got plenty of those. Is Santa, directing, involving? I think he is. I think he is. But what is the enterprise? I guess the enterprise is with his elves, right? It's conspiracy stuff. Yeah, there could be a conspiracy charge individually for each of these crimes too, because you're agreeing with another and making a plan to commit a certain crime.
Interesting.
So, for every substantive crime, if you do it with someone else, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times you'll pick up a conspiracy charge, because the idea is y'all didn't just show up and say, oh, we're doing this. You talked about it beforehand. You agreed that you would do it at some point beforehand. It might have been in the parking lot, 5 minutes before you did the deed. But if there's a prior agreement, then you've got a conspiracy charge. And Santa is definitely doing his acts. He couldn't do it by himself. And he's definitely directing this criminal enterprise. So, yeah, I think he's got RICO liability. Santa.
So does
and he's crossing state lines too. So like he's in all of the federal laws. He's now bumped up from the little state racketeering acts. He's now going fed. Yeah.
So could Mrs. Claus have any criminal liability?
You know, the thing about Mrs. Claus is Mrs. Claus might claim marital privilege. She would have a marital privilege of to not testify about any, and Santa would have one to protect her as well, about any confidential communication. So it can't be around the elves. It has to be just between the Clauses. But any confidential communications that happen during their marriage. And then the other thing is, Mrs. Claus would also have a spousal testimonial privilege. So, like if Santa was on trial, the prosecution could not call Mrs. Claus to testify against Santa. Now, actually, that's not true. The way the privilege works is the prosecution can call the spouse, but the spouse that is on the stand is the holder of the privilege. So the spouse on the stand can either invoke the privilege and then no one can make you testify against your spouse, or they can waive the privilege because that privilege is about maintaining marital harmony. And the Supreme Court has said, look, if one spouse is willing to testify against the other, well, then there's not much marital harmony preserved. So we're going to let that happen. So, you know, just to be accurate, the prosecution could call Mrs. Claus, but they couldn't compel her to testify. She could claim spousal privilege, and then she could claim marital communications privileges. And without co-conspirators, without accomplice testimony, I don't know how you rope in Mrs. Claus. Right? Like, I think you need to turn an elf. Maybe you give an elf immunity. Maybe you do something like that. Or, you know, I suppose Santa could, but Santa's the big fish here.
Yeah.
But I also think, you know, Mrs. Claus could be guilty if you could prove it. So I've been talking about issues of proof. But Mrs. Claus could be guilty of aiding and abetting. Right? She's definitely part of the preparation or plan. She supports Santa in every way. Didn't she make the suit?
I'm fairly confident. Yeah, my sources tell me.
Yeah, I think she did. And I think she sends Santa off. Did she give him cookies beforehand? I can't remember.
Yeah, one would imagine, but yeah, I don't have any positive proof about that.
You know, here was the other thing I was wondering. You know, does Santa take hot chocolate? You know, my girls, when they were little, asked me, which I thought was so sweet, what Santa wanted for Christmas. I told them Santa wanted a Starbucks gift card. I told them, which I think Santa did. I told them that, you know, Santa needs hot chocolate and Santa needs cappuccinos to stay awake. It's a long night. He's pulling an all-nighter, right? But, you know, I've wondered if Santa does have hot chocolate, is he spiking it a little bit? You know?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of like a flask or something like that. If so, obviously we run into an entire, you know, other set of transportation crimes, flying while under the influence, flying while having an open container laws, right? There could be all sorts of things.
Yeah. So the, like, how about tax evasion? You know, with you know, him, I don't know, receiving
Good one.
All of the milks and cookies, but then also giving gifts. And specifically, I'm thinking like, like you're not supposed to give really expensive gifts to people that work in the government. Like bribery and what have you. So like, what are some of the criminal statutes there?
I mean, why not bribery? Right? Like, why do you think Santa has never been prosecuted? The only reason I can think of is that Santa's probably bribing the FAA officials, maybe even the White House, because Santa's totally flying in restricted airspace over DC, over the Pentagon, all of that stuff. Now it's starting to click. Mm-hmm. It's all starting to make sense to me. It's got to be that Santa is, bribing public officials.
Yeah.
Which is the only way he would have escaped. Also, so like there's that. I also wonder, and I don't think he's paying taxes on things, but I really don't know. It took a very long time to get a certain president's tax returns made public. So I think Santa has been even less transparent with Santa's taxes than that. But you could have something like that. What else was I thinking about? Anyway.
Well, I was wondering, so like, cause there is like a gift limit, right? For federal employees. I don't know if you know what that dollar worth is, but I'd imagine it's gotta be, probably not a very big number, I'd imagine.
Yeah, this is for tax write-offs. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a limit that you can give. And, this does go back to the taxes. I'm sure he's exceeding the limit for the write-off. Is he paying taxes? I just don't think so.
Yeah, I doubt it. And
has he registered his business?
Yeah.
Has he done any of those things?
Hard to say. So
does he qualify for corporate tax, for the corporate income tax?
Yeah. Do you know whether or not like the North Pole has like a extradition treaty? That the U.S. like, so if the U.S. were to bring this case, do they have some way to bring him in front of a judge in the United States?
Yeah, you definitely would need to extradite him. And extradition is a cooperative relationship between separate sovereigns. And generally there are treaties, right, that say, we'll extradite, somebody that is found or apprehended on our grounds. We'll send them back to you. You do the same for us. There are exceptions to those treaties. So where a crime or potential punishment violates the deeply held public policy of a sovereign, sometimes they won't, like there's an exception written into that agreement. So, by the way, because I got to get death penalty in there because that's what I write about.
Sure,
but
sure.
So there's definitely been cases where European nations have refused to extradite accused murderers back to the United States where they would face the death penalty. And they'll just say, we're against the death penalty, so we're not sending them back, absent an assurance that you won't go for the death penalty. So there's all sorts of things like that. And it brings up the question, Will, which is a really good question. Would the North Pole send Santa to the United States? I'm not so sure. I think the North Pole has a vested interest in Santa, right? I think the North Pole is probably getting a lot of, what about mail fraud?
Yeah.
Is there getting a lot of mail? And there's work going on there. And, there's a whole production plant up there. So I don't know. I'm not entirely sure whether the North Pole would extradite. And that's, of course, just for financial reasons, not even thinking about, some sort of like public policy, no, we really like Santa, which in the end, I think that's where we're going with all this. Santa's committed a ton of crimes, but
which kind of leads me to think like, how fair would the jury selection process be? I mean, it's hard to argue that people don't know who Santa Claus is and what he's what he does. So like how would you approach that?
Well, there's voir dire, which could take a very, very long time. It's taken months in certain cases, and to find a jury that's an impartial jury. And, the law doesn't require that a juror hasn't heard about someone. The law requires that the juror could say, whatever I've heard will not prevent me from applying the law to the facts in a fair manner. So, in the end, that's what all those questions go to. I don't know. I mean, everybody's heard of Santa. So I think you're not going to have, I think you'd have a hard time seating a jury. The other thing is where you have high pretrial publicity, you could get a change of venue motion. But where are you going to, where are you going to send them to? The whole world knows Santa.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think you might have a hard time seating a jury.
Could
Santa
jurors
should request a jury?
Could jurors accept Christmas presents from Santa?
No, that would be an external influence. Yeah, you can't have any external influences on the jury. So you can't, a jury was very, very recently, in a recent case, was excused because the juror was in a drugstore just waiting in line and somebody behind them said something about the case. And the juror just overheard it, but it was a juror in a big case and it was information that the juror didn't know. And the juror had to report that to the judge and then say, yeah, it kind of affects my views. Gone. So that would be an external influence. You might even pick up another charge for that, for bribery, attempted bribery, or obstruction of an official proceeding. If Santa's giving out gifts, as he's wont to do.
Yeah. Now, I read recently, I don't know if it's in the Washington Post or New York Times, but there was a report about a person's grandma who was ran over by a reindeer. And the way the story goes is that they were walking home on Christmas Eve. Reportedly, they had too much eggnog and forgot their medication. But they were found with hoof prints on their forehead and claw marks on their back. So the doctors, I think, expect for her to make a full recovery. But I'm curious, what sort of, again, criminal culpability Santa would have if it's determined that he was the one responsible for grandma.
So first of all, I would say the hoof prints are a really good clue. And we call that modus operandi evidence, where it is evidence of an identity. We think of the mark of Zorro, right? That's all like very distinctive. That's what I think the reindeer hooves, I think that's what's got going. And the crime is hit and run. Right? You've got a clear hit and run there. There's no way that Santa would have run over grandma without knowing it, right? So Santa clearly knew. The law requires Santa to stay at the scene. And if someone is injured, whether or not they're asking for help or not, if someone is injured and you leave the scene, it's not just a misdemeanor hit and run, it then becomes a felony. So that could subject Santa to substantial penalties and jail time. Yeah.
Wow. So, okay. So speaking about penalties and kind of wrapping things up, I'm curious, he's been found guilty on a number of different offenses. And, what considerations would a judge, take given that he, may have a clean record, given his age, his race, his occupation, would we expect the judge to throw the book at him or give him some leniency?
I mean, isn't that the problem? Like, if the judge throws a book at him, he's going to be on the naughty list, like forever, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All the jurors too. But I think Santa has a very strong case in mitigation, right? Sentencing. So the guilt or innocence phase of a prosecution, when it's not unilateral, when it's not all prosecuted together, that's about the specific crime. Did you commit this particular crime? When you get to the sentencing phase, it's not just about the crime. It's also about the person and the person's life. And the good that you do in your life should count for something, just like the bad that you do in your life counts for something at sentencing. If you have a long record, you're going to get more time than if you had, no record. But in Santa's case, Santa not only has probably a clean record, no record, but Santa has a generosity of spirit, and has made children and, young and old alike, happy for generations. And, so Santa has the spirit of generosity. And I just have to say, if it were any time around Christmas, there's a spirit of grace, right? Mm-hmm. That just exudes the Christmas spirit. And so a judge may well be on both of those things. And of course, with backdrop, I'm going to be on the naughty list. I think the judge gives Santa a suspended sentence and lets Santa go.
Interesting.
That's what I think.
I'm wondering if the political appointment of that judge would have any bearing on how they would rule. Because, in my mind, I keep thinking, Republicans are all about, bringing Christmas back, and 'tis the season, and and all this other kind of very grounded Christian, America's founded on Christian ideals, whatever, and I envision this oversight committee led by, Jim Jordan questioning Santa, about him trying to divert attention from Jesus's birth, to this jolly guy. So do you think the political persuasion of the judge would have any impact on their ruling?
Oh, that's actually a really interesting question, because on the one hand, your more conservative thinkers are like, there's a war on Christmas, right? This is bad. As you say, bring Christmas back. And so we've got to protect Santa. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, to the extent you see, the conservative thinkers are a complete or partial overlap of, evangelical Christians, one might take a dimmer view of Santa, right? Santa has commercialized Christmas and taken the attention off of, the birth of Jesus and what this, the holy night that is Christmas, and sort of turned it into a gift bonanza of the year, which conservatives might not, take too kindly to. So, what might seem at first glance to be like, oh, they're totally, conservatives are totally going to give Santa a break. I'm not so sure. The libs, on the other hand, my gut says, they're for decarceration. Yeah. They're like, oh, this is all bad. And so I don't think they're throwing Santa in. And besides that, everybody likes presents. Yeah. But the libs even might say something to the effect of, look, if this was a person from, a person of color, or a person from a black or brown community, and brown communities, they would be put in jail. Mm-hmm. And so, maybe we need to not cut Santa any breaks. Do we love Santa because Santa's white? Like you can get into a whole existential thing on this. So I think you've got some cross-cutting currents there. But again, I don't know, perhaps it's the spirit of hope in me. I think that in the end, the judge, regardless of political persuasion, would see the good in Santa, despite his many felonious acts.
Awesome. Well, so my last question is, what are you wishing for from Santa this year?
What am I wishing for? Well, the things that I'd really like, I don't think I'm like a book contract. Okay, so there's that. I don't think that, I think that Santa's not able to give me that. Having all my exams graded, I don't think I'm getting that one either. So what would I like? Peace, health, I don't know. You get to a certain place and it's like, yeah, I've got the stuff I need. So it becomes more about, family and, joy and peace and the peace of the season.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.
How about you?
Oh, wait, me, everything that you said. I would.
You want a book contract too?
I would say, so my wife and I decided not to do presents this year. We've got our oldest child has some medical issues that we've been working through this past year, and he's getting better. So for us, like that's just the best gift that we could have. Just having healthy kids. So I would say, Santa, if you're listening, just keep on doing what you're doing. Don't come to my house.
And there's nothing like the big issues to put everything in perspective. So I wish you the very, very best this holiday season and into 2023.
Yeah, same to you. And thanks again, Corinna, for all your expertise, and good luck with your meeting with Santa if you should see him this year.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for hanging out with me.
All right. Thanks. We'll see you all next time.
Bye.